Keep your hands where I can see them. Girl, you people always think the rules do not apply to you. The words came first, sharp and deliberate, spoken loud enough to cut through the noise of the street. Then Derek Sullivan leaned in and spat onto the toe of Aaliyah Harper's canvas sneaker. A slow act of contempt meant to humiliate, not provoke, before she could react. He shoved her hard against the hood of her car. Metal cuffs snapped shut around her wrists, biting deep, forcing her shoulders back. Pain surged, dignity burned. Phones rose in unison as the crowd fell into a stunned silence that would not last. In that single instant. Though no one yet understood how or why. Derek Sullivan destroyed his own future. What happened on that corner would follow him into every courtroom, every cell, and every locked door that awaited him. Before we go any further, where are you watching from today? If stories of justice, accountability, and real consequences matter to you, subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your support helps these stories reach people who still believe the truth should be seen and heard. 8 hours earlier. Aaliyah Harper woke before sunrise in her Upper East Side townhouse. The city still muted by early light. She lay still for a moment, gathering herself, as she had learned to do long ago. Her phone vibrated once, a text from her son. "Jordan, proud of you. Mom, you always make a difference." She closed her eyes briefly, steadying the familiar ache that followed every reminder of why she did this work. She rose, dressed carefully, and chose simplicity on purpose. No suit, no heels, no badge clipped where it could speak before she did. Jeans, a Columbia hoodie, canvas sneakers worn soft with use, clothing meant to let her pass unnoticed. As she drove south, the city unfolded in layers she knew by heart. Streets where wealth felt permanent, streets where it never arrived at all, traffic lights, storefronts, faces at crosswalks. Every mile carried memory. Isaiah, her brother, 19 years old, stopped by police for fitting a description that meant nothing and everything at once. A mistake, a decision, a gunshot that ended one life and reshaped another, a file stamped closed, a family left open and bleeding. At 19. Aaliyah learned what unchecked power could do. At 23, she joined the New York Police Department to change it from the inside. At Columbia Law School, she stood at the podium as a guest lecturer, introduced without rank or title. She spoke calmly about citizen rights, about the limits of authority, about how quickly an encounter could turn irreversible. Students leaned forward, some nodding, some rigid with recognition. When they asked questions, she answered without revealing how personal her knowledge was. She spoke of accountability as a principle, not a promise. When applause filled the hall, she accepted it politely and left without lingering. She drove north again, stopping at Harlem Brew, a small corner coffee shop that carried more history than its walls could hold. Maria Gonzalez greeted her with familiarity and quiet relief. Over coffee, Maria spoke in a low voice, glancing toward the window. Officer Sullivan had been back. Again. Same routine. Parking tickets that made no sense. Stops that lingered too long. Words that cut where bruises could not be photographed. 42 complaints. Maria said, all dismissed, all buried. Her son had been one of them. Arrested without cause, lost his job, slipped into addiction, never found his way back. Maria's voice did not shake anymore. Grief had settled into something heavier. Aaliyah listened without interrupting. She knew the name. Derek Sullivan. Badge 6193. Internal affairs files thick with patterns no one wanted to connect. A protected officer, a father-in-law with influence, a system that bent quietly when Aaliyah stood to leave. Maria touched her arm and whispered, "Be careful." Aaliyah met her eyes and nodded. Careful was how she had survived. Careful was how she had waited. The Camry was parked legally on Lexington Avenue. The meter still showed time. That detail would not matter. Sullivan's cruiser slid in behind her at an angle meant to dominate. He was already writing the ticket when she approached, when she questioned him calmly. He smirked, said the meter expired, said she should learn to read. His voice grew louder, sharper, designed to draw attention. He accused her of thinking she deserved special treatment, called her names that curled the stomach. The crowd gathered instinctively. When Aaliyah reached for her phone, his hand slapped it away. Papers spilled from her bag as he pushed her forward and searched her roughly. Constitutional notes fluttered across the pavement like accusations he had never read. Maria rushed outside, shouting for him to stop. Sullivan told her to shut her mouth, told Aaliyah she was resisting. She was not. She stood perfectly still, jaw tight, eyes forward. Backup arrived. Officer Elena Ramirez stepped out and froze. Recognition flashed across her face and vanished under Sullivan's glare. Orders came fast. The cuffs came out. Metal closed. Sullivan slammed Aaliyah against the car, yelling for the cameras, "Stop resisting!" The lie echoed, captured from every angle. When he reached into her pocket and pulled free the leather wallet, everything changed. The gold badge caught the sunlight. "Captain, Internal Affairs." The air collapsed inward, his face drained of color. Fear replaced arrogance in seconds. Rage surged once more, ugly and desperate. He spat again. Sirens cut through the noise as Lieutenant Marcus Chen arrived and took in the scene. Orders were given. Cuffs removed. Aaliyah stood straight, rubbing her wrists, voice calm as she placed the call on speaker. Chief Rivera answered. An investigation was opened. Official. Immediate. Sullivan dropped to his knees, begging, mentioning his father-in-law. As dozens of phones recorded the end of his authority, this was not coincidence. This was consequence. And on that corner, beneath the weight of witnesses and truth, a career built on cruelty finally collapsed into the light. Maria Gonzalez did not raise her voice as she spoke, but every word carried weight. She had learned long ago that pain did not need volume to be heard. She told Aaliyah about the first time Derek Sullivan stopped her son, about how polite he had been at first, almost friendly, before the questions turned sharp and the search lasted too long. She described the second stop, then the third, each one more aggressive than the last. 42 complaints, she said again, as if the number itself were proof of something rotten that everyone pretended not to smell. 6 years of reports, statements, witness names, dates, and badge numbers, all dismissed, all marked unfounded, all quietly routed through the same hands. Patrick O'Donnell, deputy president of the police union, Sullivan's father-in-law, the man who knew exactly which doors to knock on and which ones to keep closed. Maria paused only once. When she spoke of her son's arrest, no charges, no apology, just a record that followed him everywhere. Job interviews that ended too soon, sleepless nights, pills that turned into something stronger, a death that never made the news. When she finished, she stared down into her empty cup, as if expecting it to answer back. Aaliyah said nothing at first. She did not rush comfort. She knew grief too well to interrupt it. Inside, memory stirred. Isaiah's face, his smile, the way his name had been reduced to a footnote in a report written by someone who never learned how to pronounce it. For 22 years. Aaliyah had carried that weight quietly, turning it into purpose, letting it sharpen her resolve without dulling her compassion. She had chosen internal affairs because it was thankless, because it was necessary, because reform only lasted when it came from discipline, not slogans. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. She told Maria she was not alone. She told her truth had a way of resurfacing, even when buried deep. Maria nodded, unconvinced but grateful for the attempt. As Aaliyah stood to leave, she felt the familiar tension settle between her shoulders, the sense that the day was leaning toward something unavoidable. Outside. The afternoon had thickened. Foot traffic increased. Cars idled. Sirens drifted in the distance like warnings no one could decode. Aaliyah walked toward her Camry with measured steps, keys already in hand. She checked the parking meter again. A habit born of years spent watching small details become excuses. 20 minutes remained. Enough. She unlocked the door, set her bag inside, and was reaching for the driver's seat when the shadow fell across her shoulder. Derek Sullivan's cruiser was already positioned behind her, angled sharply, blocking her exit. He stood with his ticket book open, pen moving fast, jaw tight with practiced authority, when she asked calmly what the issue was. He did not look up. He said the meter expired. She pointed to the display. He laughed. A short, dismissive sound. He told her she should be grateful he was only writing a ticket. He told her people like her always thought they deserved explanations. The words slid easily from his mouth, polished by repetition. Aaliyah felt the heat rise, but kept her tone even. She asked for his badge number. That was when his eyes lifted, narrowing with interest. He called her a troublemaker. He implied she had someone important paying her bills. He asked where she learned to speak so well. Each sentence was a test, each pause an invitation to react. She did not. She remembered her own lecture from that morning. Stay calm. Document everything. Dignity is your greatest weapon. When she reached into her bag for her phone, his hand shot out and slapped it away. The sound drew attention. Heads turned. A small circle formed. Sullivan stepped closer, invading her space, his voice rising so the crowd could hear. He accused her of obstructing. He told her to keep her hands visible. He pushed her forward and began searching her without cause, his movements rough and deliberate. Papers spilled onto the sidewalk, notes from her lecture on constitutional protections scattered into the street, lifted briefly by passing air before settling at his feet. Maria burst out of the coffee shop, shouting for him to stop. Sullivan turned on her instantly, telling her to mind her business, telling her she was next. Aaliyah stayed still, heart pounding but posture controlled. She knew the line he was trying to cross. Backup arrived within minutes. Officer Elena Ramirez stepped out of the second cruiser and took in the scene. She recognized Aaliyah immediately, the face from department briefings, the internal affairs captain whose reputation for fairness was well known. For a split second, relief flickered. Then Sullivan barked orders, loud, sharp, final. Ramirez felt the familiar conflict tighten in her chest. She had joined the force to protect people like her father, who had once been stopped and searched for nothing more than being in the wrong place with the wrong skin. She had promised herself she would be different. The blue wall loomed anyway. Sullivan told her to stand by, to watch, to learn. When Aaliyah calmly stated that the search was unlawful, Sullivan snapped. He accused her of resisting. He grabbed her arms and forced them behind her back. The cuffs closed with a sound that cut through the noise. Pain flared along her wrists. The metal felt colder than it should have. He slammed her against the car, shouting for the cameras. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" The lie echoed, repeated until it almost sounded real. The crowd grew larger. Phones rose higher. Faces hardened. Ramirez stood frozen, hands clenched, eyes darting between Sullivan and Aaliyah. She knew this was wrong. She also knew what happened to officers who said so out loud. Aaliyah did not fight. She did not plead. She stood there, breathing through the pain, knowing the truth was already being recorded. Sullivan reached into her pocket roughly, searching for identification, muttering insults as he went. When his fingers closed around the leather wallet, he pulled it free with irritation. flipping it open as if expecting nothing of consequence. The gold badge caught the light. Captain, Internal Affairs. Time seemed to hesitate. Sullivan stared, confusion giving way to recognition, recognition to fear. His face lost its color. His mouth opened, then closed. The power he had wielded seconds earlier slipped from his grip, replaced by panic he could not contain in that moment. Elena Ramirez made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She stepped forward. She raised her voice. She told him to stop. Sirens approached. Lieutenant Marcus Chen arrived, eyes scanning the scene, landing on the badge, the cuffs, the crowd. Orders came fast. Remove the cuffs. Secure the officer. Aaliyah straightened slowly, wrists aching, gaze steady. She took her phone back, hands trembling only slightly as she placed the call on speaker. Chief Rivera answered. An internal affairs investigation was opened on the spot. Official. Immediate. Sullivan's knees buckled. He started talking about misunderstandings, about his father-in-law, about favors and protections that had always worked before. The crowd roared, phones kept recording, and as Aaliyah listened, calm and resolute, she knew the warning Maria had whispered had already come true. The careful balance had tipped. There was no going back. Derek Sullivan did not slow down after the cuffs went on. He grew louder, sharper, more reckless, as if volume alone could restore the authority he felt slipping. He accused Aaliyah Harper of lying about everything. He said she fit a pattern. He said people like her were handed jobs to meet quotas. He sneered and called her a diversity hire who thought a hoodie could hide who she really was. He laughed and asked which white man was paying her bills, which one she belonged to. Each sentence was delivered with precision, meant to wound, meant to provoke, meant to remind her of her place. Aaliyah absorbed it in silence, jaw set, eyes forward. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. She focused on her breathing, on keeping her posture straight despite the cuffs biting into her wrists. The crowd pressed closer. Phones hovered inches from Sullivan's face. He did not care. In fact, he seemed energized by the attention. He kicked at the papers scattered on the pavement, sending pages skidding farther away, notes about constitutional rights, case law, citizen protections. He mocked them openly. He asked if she had planned to teach him the law. He told her the law belonged to men like him. Maria Gonzalez shouted again from the sidewalk, calling him a bully, calling him a disgrace. Sullivan turned and told her to shut up before she found herself in cuffs, too. His hand hovered near his holster as he said it, a subtle movement that did not go unnoticed. A ripple of fear passed through the crowd. Aaliyah felt it immediately. She knew that gesture. She had seen it before. She spoke calmly, carefully, telling him to lower his hand, reminding him there were witnesses. That was when his anger flared into something darker. He stepped closer, chest nearly touching hers, and accused her of threatening an officer. He said she was reaching for a weapon when she had not moved at all. He told the cameras she was escalating. Officer Elena Ramirez stood a few steps away, heart pounding. She recognized the script. She had watched it unfold on body cam footage during training. She had never imagined standing inside it. Sullivan barked at her to back him up, to write it down the right way, to remember where her loyalty belonged. Ramirez hesitated. Her eyes met Aaliyah's for a brief second. In that glance, she saw not defiance, but control. A woman holding herself together under pressure designed to break her. Sullivan misread the moment entirely. When Aaliyah shifted her weight slightly to ease the pain in her wrists, he grabbed her arm and slammed her harder against the car. The metal vibrated under the impact. He shouted that she was resisting. The lie rang out, repeated, amplified, captured by every phone in reach. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone yelled that he was hurting her. Someone else told him to stop. Sullivan snapped back that he was in charge. He said he would draw his weapon if he had to. His hand hovered again. Closer this time. Aaliyah felt a cold clarity settle over her. This was the moment that changed everything. She stopped speaking entirely. She did not argue. She did not plead. She held still, eyes fixed on a point beyond him, trusting the witnesses, trusting the record. Sullivan mistook her silence for weakness. He leaned in and whispered something only she could hear, a promise of how easily this could end badly for her. Elena Ramirez could not stay silent any longer. She stepped forward and told him to step back. Her voice shook, but it carried. Sullivan rounded on her instantly, rage redirected. He demanded to know who she thought she was. He reminded her who signed her evaluations. He told her to watch and learn. Ramirez swallowed and stood her ground, repeating herself, louder now. The tension cracked open as sirens approached. Sullivan ignored them. He reached into Aaliyah's back pocket roughly, muttering that he would find whatever she was hiding. His fingers closed around the leather wallet, and he yanked it free with irritation, flipping it open without looking. The gold badge caught the sunlight and reflected it straight into his eyes. Captain, Internal Affairs. The words did not register at first. He blinked, looked again. His breath caught. Color drained from his face so fast it was visible on camera. The crowd leaned in. A hush fell. Sullivan's mouth opened, searching for an insult that would not come. Fear replaced confidence in a matter of seconds. He snapped the wallet shut and tried to shove it back, as if undoing the discovery might erase it. It did not. His voice broke as he demanded to know why she had not said anything. Aaliyah finally spoke. She told him she had been listening. She told him he had said enough. The sirens grew louder. Lieutenant Marcus Chen arrived at a controlled speed that contrasted sharply with the chaos. He took in the scene in seconds. The cuffs, the crowd, the phones, the badge now visible in Aaliyah's hand. He did not raise his voice. He ordered the cuffs removed. He told Sullivan to step away. Sullivan did not comply. Panic surged into anger again. In a final act of defiance, he leaned forward and spat onto Aaliyah's shoe a second time, right in front of everyone. The crowd erupted. Shouts filled the air. Ramirez moved instinctively, grabbing Sullivan's arm as he reached for his pepper spray. Chen stepped in. Placing himself between them, he repeated the order. This time, it was obeyed. The cuffs came off. Aaliyah rubbed her wrists slowly, feeling the ache settle deep. She stood straight, smoothing her hoodie, reclaiming her space inch by inch. She took out her phone and placed the call on speaker. Chief Vanessa Rivera answered immediately. Aaliyah identified herself clearly, formally, stating her badge number and rank. She reported the incident as it was still unfolding. She requested an immediate internal affairs response and federal notification. Rivera's voice carried authority and resolve. She authorized it all. On record. Sullivan's knees buckled. He dropped to the pavement, hands shaking, voice cracking as he begged Chen to call his father-in-law. He promised this could be fixed. He said it always had been. The words hung in the air, damning and undeniable. 25 phones captured his collapse from different angles. Elena Ramirez stood back, breathing hard, knowing she had crossed a line she could never uncross. Aaliyah watched Sullivan quietly, not with satisfaction, but with finality. The escalation he had chosen was complete. The threat had failed. The truth was no longer containable, and the reckoning had begun. The leather wallet felt heavier in Derek Sullivan's hand than it had any right to. He stared at it as if it might explain itself, as if the gold badge inside could somehow become something else if he waited long enough. Captain, Internal Affairs. The words echoed in his head, colliding with everything he thought he knew about the moment he was standing in. His confidence evaporated in real time. His shoulders sagged. His mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time since he had stepped out of his cruiser, he did not know what to say. The crowd sensed it immediately. The energy shifted. Phones moved closer. Whispers turned sharp. Aaliyah Harper said nothing at first. She simply met his eyes, calm and unflinching, allowing the silence to do its work. Sullivan tried to recover. He demanded to know why she had not identified herself. He accused her of setting him up. His voice rose, cracking at the edges, anger scrambling to cover fear. He snapped that she had let this happen on purpose. Aaliyah answered evenly, telling him she had followed the law. She reminded him that he never asked, that he never listened. The truth landed harder than any insult. Sullivan's face twisted, rage flaring one last time, untethered and desperate, in a final, astonishing act of contempt. He leaned forward and spat onto her shoe again. The sound was unmistakable. The reaction was instant. The crowd erupted. Shouts cut through the air. Someone screamed for him to be arrested. Officer Elena Ramirez moved without thinking, grabbing Sullivan's arm as he reached toward his belt. His fingers brushed the canister of pepper spray. Lieutenant Marcus Chen stepped in immediately, positioning himself between Sullivan and Aaliyah with practiced authority. He ordered Sullivan to stand down. Sullivan ignored him, eyes wild, breath shallow, trapped between instinct and consequence. Chen repeated the order, slower, louder, unmistakable. This time, Sullivan froze. The sirens that had been approaching now arrived in full force. Patrol cars lining the curb, lights flashing, attention unavoidable. Chen turned to Ramirez and instructed her to remove the cuffs from Captain Harper. The word captain carried weight. The metal clicked open. Aaliyah flexed her wrists slowly, pain radiating up her arms. But she did not rush the movement. She took a breath. She straightened her hoodie. She stepped away from the car on her own terms. The crowd quieted just enough to hear her voice as she lifted her phone and placed the call on speaker. She identified herself formally. Name, rank, badge number. She stated the facts without embellishment, reporting the assault, the unlawful detention, the racial harassment, and the second act of spitting, all witnessed and recorded. Chief Vanessa Rivera responded immediately, her voice steady and controlled. She authorized a full internal affairs investigation on the spot and instructed Chen to place Sullivan under arrest pending further charges. There was no hesitation, no negotiation. Sullivan's knees buckled as the words sank in. He dropped to the pavement, hands shaking, uniform darkening as fear overwhelmed him. He began talking rapidly, incoherently, mentioning his father-in-law, insisting this was a misunderstanding, begging Chen to make a call. He said it had always been handled before. The confession spilled out unchecked, each word captured by dozens of phones. Chen listened without expression. He ordered Sullivan to stand. When Sullivan could not, he ordered officers to assist him. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the man who had dominated the corner minutes earlier was lifted, cuffed, and escorted away. His authority stripped in front of the very witnesses he had tried to intimidate. Aaliyah remained where she was, breathing evenly, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. Maria Gonzalez stood nearby, tears streaming down her face, hands pressed together as if in prayer. Elena Ramirez stood off to the side, heart racing, knowing there was no turning back now. She had intervened, she had spoken, she had been seen. Chen approached Aaliyah quietly and asked if she was all right. She nodded once, then corrected herself and said she would be. It was enough. Additional officers arrived, forming a perimeter, but the damage was already done. 25 separate videos continued recording as Sullivan was placed into a cruiser, his protests fading beneath the sound of doors closing. The crowd did not cheer. They watched. They understood. The moment was bigger than celebration. It was evidence. Within the hour, internal affairs investigators were en route, Federal authorities were notified. The story spread faster than anyone could stop it. By the time the street reopened, the incident had already begun circulating nationwide. For Aaliyah Harper, the adrenaline slowly ebbed, replaced by a familiar ache, not just in her wrists, but deeper. The ache of knowing this moment was necessary, but never simple. She thought of Isaiah. She thought of the years she had spent quietly building cases, pushing against resistance, waiting for the right fracture. This was not how she had planned it, but it was how it happened. Elena Ramirez approached her hesitantly and apologized. Aaliyah looked at her for a long moment, then thanked her for stepping forward. It mattered. Chen oversaw the final reports, ensuring every detail was logged accurately, every witness identified. As the scene wound down, the coroner returned slowly to movement, though something intangible had changed. People walked away carrying more than video files. They carried proof. Later that evening, as Aaliyah finally left the scene, escorted but not shielded, she understood the full weight of what had occurred. Derek Sullivan's collapse was not just personal, it was systemic. The web he relied on had been exposed in daylight. The protection he believed in had failed him publicly and completely. His career was over, his future rewritten, and the investigation he had unknowingly provoked would reach far beyond him. This was the point of no return, not just for one officer, but for a system that could no longer pretend it did not see. The arrest did not slow the momentum, it multiplied it. Within hours of Derek Sullivan being taken away in handcuffs, Captain Aaliyah Harper was no longer standing alone as the subject of a viral video. She had become the focal point of something much larger, something long suppressed and finally unleashed. Phones at Internal Affairs began ringing non-stop. Emails poured in. Messages arrived from people who had watched the footage and recognized the pattern instantly, because they had lived it. By midnight, dozens of individuals had come forward, each with a story that carried the same fingerprints: stops without cause, searches that lingered too long, threats delivered softly, with a smile meant to warn rather than invite resistance, tickets written and then quietly erased, arrests that went nowhere but left scars behind. By the next morning, the count reached 62 victims willing to put their names on record, all tied directly to Derek Sullivan. Nearly all were Black or Latino. Nearly all described the same phrases, the same posture, the same sense of being hunted rather than policed. Agent Marcus Tate of the FBI arrived before dawn. He had reviewed the footage repeatedly during the flight, slowing it frame by frame, the second act of spitting, the moment of panic, the confession about protection. Tate understood immediately what this meant. This was no longer a local misconduct case. This was a federal civil rights investigation under color of law. With conspiracy written all over it, his team moved quickly and methodically. Dashcam footage was seized before it could be altered. Body camera archives were pulled and duplicated. Internal complaint records were subpoenaed, including files marked resolved, unfounded, or administratively closed. What emerged was a pattern so clear it defied explanation. 350 suspicious stops attributed to Sullivan alone. 95% involved minority citizens. Nearly $2.5 million in civil settlements had been paid quietly over the years, routed through city funds and legal agreements designed to prevent admission of wrongdoing. None of it had triggered disciplinary action. The same name appeared again and again in the approval chain. Patrick O'Donnell, Deputy President of the Police Union, father-in-law, fixer, Sullivan. Meanwhile, sat in custody, stripped of his uniform and authority, struggling to comprehend the speed of his collapse. Word spread quickly inside the facility. Some inmates recognized him immediately, others learned soon enough. He was moved twice within 48 hours after threats were made. Guards no longer addressed him with familiarity. His phone privileges were restricted after repeated attempts to call his father-in-law, when his wife finally reached him. The call disintegrated into shouting and accusations. By the end of the week, divorce papers were filed. His bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. His pension was placed under review. Everything he had relied on, every safety net he believed was permanent, unraveled with alarming speed. Victims continued to arrive at internal affairs offices in steady waves. Some came angry, others came trembling. Many had never believed anyone would listen. A black veteran described being pulled from his car and beaten after questioning a citation. A Latina nurse recounted being searched on her way to a night shift, while Sullivan joked with his partner about her accent. A college student spoke haltingly about being threatened with fabricated charges that nearly derailed his future. Each testimony was documented carefully, cross-checked, and logged. Patterns aligned down to the smallest details. Time of day, locations, language used. The same phrases surfaced again and again. It was not coincidence. It was routine. Aaliyah worked without pause. She reviewed files late into the night, checking dates, signatures, and routing paths. She ensured procedures were followed precisely, knowing any misstep would be exploited. She met with victims personally when possible, listening more than speaking, offering clarity rather than promises. At night, when the building finally emptied, the weight of it pressed harder. Isaiah returned to her thoughts with cruel clarity. The sound of a gunshot she had never heard but always felt. The way his name had been reduced to a paragraph in a report written by someone who went home unchanged. She carried that grief into her work, not as fuel for anger, but as a reminder of what failure looked like. Officer Elena Ramirez faced her own reckoning. Internal Affairs interviewed her at length. She did not minimize anything. She turned over dash cam footage, body cam audio, handwritten notes she had kept out of fear, and finally the recording she had hidden for months. In it, Sullivan laughed during a patrol shift, bragging that his father-in-law fixed everything, saying complaints were meaningless, saying consequences did not apply to him. Ramirez's hands shook as she submitted it. She understood what it meant. Her reputation within the department would suffer. Promotions would disappear. She might never be trusted by certain colleagues again, but she also knew she would be able to look at herself in the mirror. Silence had cost too many people too much already. Federal charges were drafted swiftly: assault, false imprisonment, civil rights violations, obstruction, conspiracy. The scope widened to include union interference and administrative cover-ups. Patrick O'Donnell was subpoenaed and questioned under oath. For the first time, his confidence faltered. His answers conflicted with records. His phone logs contradicted his testimony. Emails surfaced showing direct involvement in complaint dismissals. The protection he had engineered for years began to crack under scrutiny. Public pressure intensified. News outlets replayed the footage constantly. Commentators stopped debating intent and focused on evidence. City officials scrambled to respond. The mayor announced immediate reforms. The police department suspended multiple officers pending review. Supervisors who had signed off on dismissals were placed on leave. The complaint system itself came under investigation, its failures laid bare for all to see. Aaliyah addressed the press only once. She did not posture. She did not raise her voice. She stated plainly that the case was not about vengeance. It was about accountability. She said no badge placed anyone above the law. She said systems that punish honesty and reward silence will always fail the public. Her words traveled far beyond the city. Victims in other states reached out. Advocates took notice. Lawmakers requested briefings. What began as a single abusive stop had become a national reckoning. Sullivan remained in custody, isolated and increasingly desperate. He wrote apology letters to people whose names he barely remembered. Letters filled with regret that arrived too late. Most went unanswered. inside training rooms and briefing halls. His name began to surface as a cautionary example. The enforcer was gone. In his place stood a warning, and as the investigation deepened, one truth became unavoidable. This was never just about one man. It was about a system that had protected him until it could no longer hide. The reckoning was no longer approaching. It was underway, and there would be no turning back. The federal trial began on a gray Monday morning in Manhattan, and by noon it had already become a national spectacle. The courtroom filled quickly, not with theatrics, but with weight. Victims sat shoulder to shoulder behind the prosecution, some holding hands, others staring straight ahead, determined not to look at the man who had once terrorized them. Derek Sullivan entered in custody attire. No badge, no swagger. Escorted by marshals who treated him with the same distance he had once shown others. Cameras were kept outside, but the tension inside needed no broadcast. From the opening statements, the case was clear. This was not about a bad day or a misunderstood stop. This was about years of deliberate abuse carried out under the protection of authority. The prosecution laid out the pattern methodically, walking the jury through stop after stop, complaint after complaint, all dismissed, all erased, all connected. Evidence followed evidence. Dash cam footage showing stops with no probable cause. Body cam audio capturing the same phrases repeated across different years. Financial records detailing quiet settlements designed to buy silence. Then came the recordings. Officer Elena Ramirez's audio played in open court. Sullivan's voice filled the room, laughing, boasting that his father-in-law fixed everything, that complaints did not matter, that he could do whatever he wanted. Jurors shifted in their seats. One woman closed her eyes. There was no objection that could undo what had already landed. Victims testified next. A black veteran described being pulled from his vehicle and beaten for questioning a citation. His voice steady despite the memory. A Latina nurse recounted being searched and mocked on her way to work, her hands shaking as she spoke. A college student described the night he thought his future was over because Sullivan threatened to plant charges. Each testimony added another layer, another confirmation that this was not coincidence. Defense attorneys attempted to reframe the narrative, suggesting stress, misunderstanding, selective memory. It did not hold. The pattern was too consistent. The evidence too complete. When Patrick O'Donnell took the stand, the atmosphere tightened further. He denied interference at first, speaking confidently, relying on habits that had served him for decades. Then the records appeared. Call logs, emails, complaint routing forms bearing his influence. His answers began to fracture. Contradictions piled up. The fixer had no fix left. By the end of his testimony, it was clear he was no longer a shield, but a liability. The jury watched closely. They understood exactly what they were seeing when Captain Aaliyah Harper took the stand. The courtroom quieted in a way that could not be ordered. She was sworn in and seated, posture straight, voice calm. She did not speak of herself at first. She spoke of process, of duty, of what internal affairs was meant to be. She explained how systems fail not because of one bad actor, but because silence is rewarded and courage is punished. Only then did she speak of the day on Lexington and 125th Street. She recounted it without embellishment, the insults, the shove, the cuffs, the spitting, the moment she realized it was being recorded from every angle. She described her decision not to identify herself, explaining that the law did not require it and that she wanted the encounter to unfold exactly as it would for anyone else. Then she spoke of Isaiah, her brother, 19 years old, killed during a mistaken stop. A pause settled over the room as she said his name. She explained how his death shaped every decision she had made since, how she joined the department not to belong, but to change it, how she chose internal affairs because reform only lasts when it is enforced. Her voice never broke. but the emotion was unmistakable. Even the defense did not press her hard on cross-examination. There was nothing to gain. Judge Elena Vargas presided with precision and restraint. She allowed no theatrics. Objections were ruled on swiftly. Delays were denied. When closing arguments arrived, the prosecution did not raise its voice. It did not need to. It walked the jury through the evidence one final time, reminding them that the law applies equally or it fails entirely. The defense argued for leniency, citing stress, citing service, citing family. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all federal counts, guilty on state charges to follow. Sullivan stood as the decision was read, his face rigid, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. There was no outburst, no denial, just the hollow stillness of inevitability. Sentencing followed days later. Victims were allowed to speak. Some chose not to, others did. A man with a limp described how fear lingered long after bruises healed. A mother spoke of teaching her children to keep their heads down. Maria Gonzalez stood and spoke simply, saying her son would never come back, but maybe someone else's would, when it was time for the sentence. Judge Vargas spoke plainly. She said the court had considered the severity of the crimes, the abuse of authority, and the lasting harm inflicted. She said law enforcement power exists only by public trust, and that trust had been shattered deliberately and repeatedly. She sentenced Derek Sullivan to 15 years total, 10 years federal, 5 years state, maximum security at Sing Sing. She ordered restitution where applicable. She revoked eligibility for early release. The gavel fell once. There was no applause. Only release. Immediately after sentencing, federal agents moved on Patrick O'Donnell. He was arrested on corruption and obstruction charges as he exited the courthouse, the same doors he had once walked through with confidence. News broke within minutes. The fallout was immediate. Officials issued statements. Departments announced reviews. But inside the courtroom, Aaliyah remained seated for a moment longer. The weight of it all settled slowly. Justice had not erased the past. It had not brought Isaiah back, but it had drawn a line that could not be ignored. As she stood and prepared to leave, she understood that this trial was not the end of the story. It was the proof. Proof that accountability was possible. Proof that power could be challenged. And proof that silence, once broken, never fully returns. 8 months after the verdict, the numbers told a story the city could not ignore. Formal complaints against New York Police Department officers dropped by 55%. Not because people were afraid to speak, but because behavior had changed. Stops were shorter, body cameras stayed on, supervisors intervened earlier. The quiet assumptions that once protected misconduct no longer held. Captain Aaliyah Harper was promoted to deputy chief and placed in charge of a newly restructured oversight division with authority that could not be quietly overridden. One of her first actions was the launch of a direct citizen reporting app, designed to bypass internal bottlenecks and preserve evidence in real time. Every submission generated a timestamp, an external archive, and automatic notification to independent reviewers. No more disappearing files. No more quiet dismissals. The message was clear. Transparency was no longer optional. At the state level, reforms followed quickly. Union contracts were rewritten to limit interference in disciplinary processes. Mandatory early warning systems flagged repeat complaints before patterns could metastasize. Training shifted from abstract policy to lived consequence, using real cases, real footage, and real outcomes. The case had a name now, the Harper Model. Lawmakers in Washington took notice. A proposed federal bill, informally called the Harper Act, moved through committee with bipartisan momentum. Its core provisions were simple and firm: prohibit the dismissal of citizen complaints without independent review, require permanent preservation of body camera footage tied to allegations, Establish federal penalties for union or administrative obstruction. For the first time in years. Reform was not a slogan. It was language being written into law. Aaliyah returned to Columbia University 1 year after the incident. This time, she was introduced by name, rank, and reputation. The auditorium rose to its feet before she reached the podium. She waited for the applause to fade, hands resting lightly on the lectern, expression composed. She spoke plainly, without flourish, about the cost of accountability and the courage it requires. She reminded the students that the law is only as strong as the people willing to enforce it honestly. When questions came, they were sharper now, more hopeful. She answered them all, at the end. She stood quietly as the room erupted again, not in celebration, but in resolve. Later that afternoon, Aaliyah drove alone to a cemetery she had avoided for years. Isaiah's grave lay beneath a tree whose shade shifted slowly with the light. She stood there without speaking, hands clasped, breathing evenly. The ache was still there. It always would be. But something else had settled alongside it. Peace. Fragile but real. She told him the truth had finally been spoken out loud. She told him his name mattered. When she left, she did not look back. Officer Elena Ramirez's career took a different path than the one she had imagined when she first pinned on her badge. Promotions stalled, invitations faded, but something else grew in their place. She was asked to speak to recruits, then to supervisors, then to departments outside the city. She taught a course on moral courage and lawful intervention. Using her own experience as the foundation, she told officers that loyalty without conscience is not loyalty at all. Some resisted, others listened. A few thanked her quietly afterward. It was enough. The fallout extended far beyond New York. Departments in other states reopened cold misconduct cases. Whistleblowers came forward, citing the Sullivan conviction as proof that silence was no longer the safer choice. Training academies added the case to curricula, not as scandal, but as instruction. This is what abuse looks like. This is how it escalates. This is how it ends. At Sing Sing Correctional Facility, Derek Sullivan learned a different kind of routine. He worked kitchen duty, head down, eyes alert. His name carried weight inside, and not the kind he once enjoyed. Apology letters left his cell weekly, addressed to people whose lives he had disrupted. Most were never answered. His family dissolved quietly. His pension was revoked permanently. In academy classrooms, his case was dissected without mercy, not to humiliate, but to warn. Authority without restraint is a liability. He became a footnote in reform, a cautionary example stripped of myth. Patrick O'Donnell's trial followed months later. Conviction was swift. The fixer had fixed his last problem. Union leadership changed. Oversight tightened. The culture shifted, slowly but visibly. It was not perfect. It never would be. But it was different. Aaliyah Harper continued her work without ceremony. She declined book deals. She limited interviews. She focused on systems, not spotlight. When asked how it felt to be the symbol of reform, she answered simply that symbols are fragile, but structures endure. She reminded people that justice does not come from a single badge or a single trial. It comes from ordinary people who choose to record, to speak, to stand. The story did not end with a gavel or a sentence. It continued in policy meetings, training rooms, city council chambers, and quiet decisions made under pressure. It lived in the pause before an officer chose restraint, in the courage of a witness who lifted a phone, in the resolve of a woman who refused to identify herself so the truth could speak freely. And when Aaliyah was asked, once more, to sum it all up, she did not hesitate. Justice, she said, does not arrive on its own. It is carried forward by people willing to expose the darkness and stay standing when the light finally comes. Thank you for watching and standing with the truth. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes accountability matters. Your support helps these stories be heard,